Welcome to Futures Hub, the podcast that ignites curiosity and navigates the pathways to tomorrow. I'm Mia, your guide on this journey into the future, where we explore the art of foresight, community co-creation, and personal growth. In each episode, we dive deep into innovative techniques to unlock the potential to shape our individual capacities and contribute to vibrant communities. Whether you're a seasoned futurist or just dipping your toes into the world of foresight, let's embark on this journey together. Welcome to Futures Hub. Welcome to Futures Hub. I'm Mia, and this is the launch of Season 3. At the start of previous seasons, we've taken time to look ahead, to explore trends and emerging patterns in the foresight, community engagement, and co-creation space. That work is still important, but as we were thinking about how to open this season, we found ourselves asking a deeper question. What actually helps people make sense of the futures they're living inside of right now? Because when we were thinking about the Season 3 launch, many of the trends we're dealing with is repeat and echo and often skim the surface of much deeper dynamics. However, what trends rarely surface are the hard trade-offs, the contradictions and the pressures that people are navigating every day. So for this season launch, we're shifting our focus from trends to tensions. Tensions are where foresight becomes real. They show up where values collide with constraints, where past and future pull in different directions, and where individual efforts meet collective responsibility. Tensions demand that we sit inside complexity and make conscious choices. You can see this in places like climate action, housing, or caregiving, where urgency is undeniable but resources are constrained, where progress is demanded but histories of harm remain unresolved, and where individuals are asked to carry responsibility for challenges that are collective in nature. In foresight, tensions matter because they signal where systems are under strain. They show us where something cannot continue as it is, where trade-offs are emerging, constraints are being felt, and choices about the future become unavoidable. This season launch, rather than asking what's new, we're going to be focusing on the tensions that ask what is being stressed, contested, or stretched, and what might give way or emerge as a result. Planning theorists have long described these conditions as wicked problems that can't be solved outright, only navigated through ongoing trade-offs. Wicked problems were first defined in the 1973 paper titled Dilemmas in a General Theory of Planning by Horst Riddle and Melvin Weber. Wicked problems are defined by irreducible tensions where there are no single right answers or solutions. So when we talk about tensions, we're talking about the conditions that make foresight so important in the first place. The tensions we'll be exploring today weren't necessarily chosen because they're exhaustive, but because they consistently show up across different contexts, whether in community work, public service, cultures, or personal decision-making alike. Together, they offer different entry points into how futures are felt, carried, and constrained in real life, both personally and collectively. Another important framing for today's episode is that not only is this episode designed to be our Season 3 launch, but it is also designed to guide you, the listener, through a series of personal futures exercises, tools that are used in futures work, but are adapted here for personal reflection and visioning. The tools that we'll be exploring in our exercises today are commonly used in futures planning and systems work, but today we're deliberately using them in a lightweight and more personal way. While we reference the origins of these tools, they're not intended to be applied perfectly with an organizational or industrial or professional lens. Rather, they're meant to be used as personal tools to help you notice patterns that might otherwise stay invisible. At Futures Hub, one of the areas we're most intent on exploring is the connection between personal and collective or community flourishing. Today's episode is an exercise in personal and community reflection in practice. Through this episode, we invite listeners into the same inquiry using the same tools to reflect on different futures, their personal futures, in parallel with other listeners. Reflections are designed to be private and non-extractive, But we do invite listeners into shared sense-making across time, recognizing that every individual's reflections matter. Even though we're not in the same room together, when many people move through the same foresight process, holding different futures but using shared tools, it's nice to imagine that something collective begins to form. Patterns emerge, common pressures surface, a kind of shared sense-making takes place. This episode is, in a way, intended to mirror a similar feeling to that which arose in the Futures Room last year. Futures Hub's participatory installation, a container where personal futures become part of a larger, evolving tapestry. If you have the ability to write or sketch, you may want to take a piece of paper now. Alternatively, we welcome you to download the corresponding and complementary tensions map in the show notes for this episode to help guide your process. It can be found online on futureshub.ca. If neither of these options are available to you right now, that's okay. You can do these exercises mentally too, just carrying it in your mind as you reflect on the questions. You're always welcome to revisit this episode in future if you have a little bit more space and time for reflection. With that being said, I invite you to choose one future to hold throughout this episode. It could be something personal to you, something in your professional life, something community-based or cultural. Anything you care deeply about and want to see sustained, realized, protected, or transformed. Feel free to pause the episode here to imagine that future as clearly and vividly as possible and to hold it with you throughout this episode. There's no right or wrong future to choose here. If what you're holding feels vague, unresolved, or still forming, don't worry. That's more than enough. The exercises we're doing today aren't about clarity, they're about attention. We will be returning to this future again and again. The first tension we're exploring in this episode is the tension between moral urgency and material capacity. This is the feeling of knowing something must change, while also feeling the limits of time, funding, energy, or infrastructure. Many futures stall or fracture, not because the desire for change isn't strong enough, but because the capacity to carry that change through is uneven, unavailable, or fragile. To explore this tension, we'll be using the impact versus effort matrix, a prioritization tool originating in operations management, lean, and agile project management contexts that help to compare potential impact against the effort required to achieve it. A template of this is available on the tensions map in the show notes on futureshub.ca. If you're using a scrap piece of paper or simply trying to visualize this, though, imagine a 2x2 grid. The vertical axis of the grid represents impact, while the horizontal axis represents effort. The top of the vertical axis indicates a greater sense of importance or impact on the future outcome, whereas the right side of the horizontal axis represents a significant amount of effort needed for the action, change, or initiative to occur. Think again about the future you're holding. What actions, changes, or initiatives need to happen to realize this future? Locate them on the matrix according to how important they are to your imagined future versus how much effort or capacity they would take to complete. Do this intuitively. You're not looking for precision with these exercises. Rather, you're doing this to notice pressure points. Feel free to pause the audio here to complete this exercise. Once you're done mapping the impact versus effort matrix, what you'll end up with is 4 quadrants. The top right quadrant indicates actions, changes, or initiatives that you might deem significant items for the future you're imagining. Those with high impact but requiring high effort. This is where urgency exists but capacity may be lacking. The top left quadrant represents quick wins, things with high impact but low effort. The lower right quadrant are distractions, things with low impact but take a high amount of effort. And finally, the bottom left quadrant represents fillers, low impact and low effort activities. As you do this exercise, notice what shows up for you. Look at your matrix, specifically at that top right quadrant, where urgency is high but capacity may be constrained, or the effort required may feel monumental. These are the things that may feel stuck, or heavy, or fragile. We often assume that these things are stuck simply because we lack money or time, especially when these things are related to our personal life or personal aspirations. But often these things can be stuck because you're fighting against a deeper current. High urgency or impact with low capacity is not a failure, but it's a signal. When many people experience the same imbalance, that tension becomes collective. As you do this exercise, remember, across many people and many futures, patterns tend to repeat. What you're noticing here may not be only personal, but it may hint at collective strain. Hold on to what you've mapped. This is the first thread in our tapestry. The second tension is something that we're going to be discussing in more depth later in this season. The fact that futures are not only built forward, but are also anchored in our past. This tension exists between the push to move ahead and the need or importance to remember what has already occurred in the past. But when histories are ignored or compressed, futures often become brittle rather than resilient. In many contexts, forgetting the past doesn't speed progress, it destabilizes it. To explore this, we're drawing inspiration from causal layered analysis, a tool that was developed by Sohai Anayatullah, which encourages us to look beneath surface narratives to the deeper stories shaping our futures. It is often visualized as an iceberg, with current events happening at the top and more deep-seated causes for these events hidden beneath the surface. For the purpose of this exercise, we'll be simplifying it into two layers. Again, the template for this may be found on futureshub.ca, or you could use a scrap piece of paper or visualize this exercise. On the top layer, place those major projects or actions that you identified in the top right quadrant of the previous exercise, those significant items. On the bottom layer, consider what histories, memories, knowledge, or experiences must be remembered for this future to be just and durable. Feel free to pause the audio here to complete this exercise. Once complete, notice the connections between the two layers. Futures don't float, disconnected from context and history. They rest on what came before. Take a moment to reflect on the work you've done so far. Notice if any tensions are arising. Are there any elements of these significant items that feel daunting because it's disconnected from its roots? Or are the roots themselves under strain? See if you can draw those connections between the bottom layer and the top. You are now holding two threads under tension: urgency versus capacity, forward motion versus memory. Listeners are always welcome to share their insights in the comments, though it is not a requirement to do so. If conducting this exercise together in shared space, however, you may find that reflections begin to echo. And this is how collective insights form, not from agreement, but from resonance. When many people surface similar histories or losses beneath different futures, that's a type of collective signal, one that often remains invisible without intentional reflection. At this point, you have identified histories or memories that must be carried or remembered for your imagined future to survive. That is a heavy thing to hold. And this brings us to our final tension, a tension that we've explored in past seasons and that we'll continue to explore in this season. When you look at this history identified, or the urgent tasks from the first tool, ask yourself, who is actually carrying them? Is it just you? The third and final tension we'll be exploring in this episode is that of individual voice versus collective responsibility. This is the deepest reflection in today's episode, with several questions to consider. Often, when urgency is high and memory is heavy, individuals end up carrying more than they should. Futures become exhausting when responsibility isn't shared. For this third tension, we will ask ourselves a deceptively simple question. Where does my responsibility end? And where does something larger than me need to begin? Often, when faced with wicked problems, such as climate change or cost of living crisis, just to name a couple, individuals are encouraged to do more, care harder, or take responsibility, while systems, institutions, and infrastructures often feel abstract or invisible. So instead of asking what you personally should carry, this reflection invites you to look at the relationships around you and to listen for where responsibility is being shared, displaced, or quietly assumed. This reflection is inspired by something called an actance map. It comes from systemic design and actor network theory and is used to understand how people and institutions relate to one another. Not just who's involved, but how expectations, concerns, and value actually move through a system. Once again, we would like to welcome you to refer to the template available for this exercise in the show notes for this episode on futureshub.ca, or feel free to jot down your responses. Alternatively, you don't need to write anything down. You can simply consider your answers to the following questions. First, remember that imagined future. Choose one role that you inhabit in this future. Specifically, consider the role that is carrying the history or urgency you uncovered in the last two exercises. The role doesn't need to be your whole identity. It could just be a position that you occupy in this future. It might be a worker or a caregiver, a community member or a parent, a volunteer, a resident, or a creator, for example. With this role in mind, consider, what do I hope for from this position? What concerns or worries do I carry? What do I currently give, whether in time or energy or emotional labor or attention? Now think of another actor that contributes to this future. An actor in this context could be an institution, a system, an organization, a stakeholder or partner or an entity that influences what is possible, even if it feels distant. With this actor in mind, consider, what do I think this actant expects? What does this actant seem to prioritize? What does it receive or ask for from people like me? Between you and this other actant, is there a shared purpose, even a fragile one? Or are there assumptions of alignment that have never really been spoken aloud? If there is a shared purpose, where does it feel strong and where does it feel strained? Now, notice the flow of value. What do you give? What do you need in return? Is there an imbalance? Where does it exist? If an imbalance exists, it's a signal. When many individuals notice the same imbalance, the same giving without return, it's a collective issue or signal. This final exercise is a small act of systemic listening. It's an exercise not for you to decide what you should carry or unload, but to sense where responsibility might need to be redesigned or reimagined. These are not tools to either rescind or offload individual agency, but to begin considering how we might show up in community, what we might want to ask for or need to ask for, who we might want to connect to. Before we move on, let's pause here for a moment. If you've been writing, reflecting, or even just sitting with these questions, you've done quite a lot. Not in the sense of arriving at answers, but in the sense of staying with tensions long enough to notice how it shapes your thinking, your choices, and your sense of responsibility. This is an important moment to revisit the purpose of these exercises. These exercises aren't meant to resolve or solve anything today. They're not here to produce alignment or consensus or a neat little takeaway. Their purpose is simpler and perhaps harder. These exercises are meant to help you notice what you're carrying, what feels stuck, and where your personal sense of agency brushes up against collective limits. So, if what you're left holding right now feels unfinished, contradictory, or perhaps even uncomfortable, that doesn't mean it's a failure, either on your part or on the part of the exercise. It means it's a signal. You can think of this moment as a threshold. At this point, we're stepping out of the structured reflective exercises and back into the wider world, but we're not stepping away empty-handed. The things you've named, however partial or provisional, become a point of orientation, something you can perhaps return to in future, revise, or carry forward into future conversations. And it's from that place, not necessarily from a place of certainty, but from a place of careful, mindful attention, that we want to open this out beyond the individual, that we want to step into the community and the collective. We would love to hear how these exercises may have felt for you, where they resonated or where they may have been challenged or challenging. Sharing is never an obligation here, especially when we're doing personal exercises such as these, but when people offer a fragment of what they noticed, whether it's a question, attention, or a moment of recognition, it helps us all listen more carefully for patterns that no single reflection can reveal on its own. If you're interested in sharing, please feel free to share a note with us in the comments or even send an email to info@futureshub.ca. As we wrap up today's episode, we'd like you to imagine everyone listening, in different spaces, in different times, and each potentially holding a different future, but working through the same tensions and tools. Imagine if we layered all of these reflections together, perhaps we'd begin to see a tapestry emerge. Perhaps we wouldn't just see random points, but we would see thousands of us pointing to potential gaps in the systems we live, work, and play in. Places we may be individually carrying what may need to be collectively held. Futures that feel urgent, but under-resourced. Futures that rely on memory just as much as on innovation. Futures that cannot be sustained by individual effort alone. Through time, individual reflection becomes collective sense-making. Not through erasing difference, but through surfacing patterns across difference. This season, we invite you to continue listening across episodes and to revisit your reflections regularly to see how things evolve or change over time for you. As season 3 unfolds, you may notice these same tensions and sometimes even these same tools reappear in different conversations throughout the season. Your reflections today are not an endpoint. They are a beginning and a contribution to a thread that is woven into a larger, ongoing inquiry. Over the course of this season, we'll return to these tensions and name the patterns that we hear emerging across guests, stories, and communities. In that way, your reflections today don't disappear. They quietly continue to shape the collective inquiry moving forward. Thank you for participating with us today, for holding a future with care, and for sitting with its tensions rather than rushing to solutions. Season 3 of Futures Hub is about staying with complexity long enough to imagine something more honest, more collective, and more just. And we're so glad you're here. If you're interested in what Futures Hub is doing, we always welcome new collaborators in this space. Please don't hesitate to reach out. You can contact us through our website on futureshub.ca. As always, thanks for listening to Futures Hub. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your network, leave us a review, and help us bring more people into this conversation about the futures we can co-create. Tag us on Instagram or LinkedIn, share your thoughts, and let's keep the discussion going about how we can shape better futures together. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to Futures Hub so you never miss an episode. Thanks for tuning in, and until next time, keep imagining, keep co-creating, and keep working towards those better futures for all. Locate them on the matrix according to how important they are to your future. Locate them on the matrix according to how important they are to your imagined future versus how much effort or capacity it would take to complete it.